The rain was coming down like bullets from the sky. David Chun sat in his $200,000 car, watching the windshield wipers fight a losing battle against the storm. Steam was rising from the hood and that awful smell of burning metal filled the air. His phone buzzed again with another missed call from his board of directors. "This cannot be happening right now," he muttered, hitting the steering wheel with his fist. The engine had died completely about 10 minutes ago. Right in the middle of nowhere. His GPS showed he was still 40 miles away from the city, and the next board meeting was starting in less than 2 hours. David stepped out into the rain, immediately soaking his $3,000 suit. The cold water hit his face like tiny ice picks, and within seconds his perfectly styled hair was plastered to his head. He looked around desperately for any sign of help. That's when he spotted it, a small building with a flickering neon sign that read Rosa's Family Diner. The place looked like it belonged in the 1980s. The paint was peeling off the walls, and there were rust stains around the windows, but right now it was the only shelter he could find. David grabbed his laptop bag and phone, then ran toward the entrance as fast as he could. The moment he pushed open the glass door, a bell jingled above his head. The warmth hit him immediately, along with the smell of coffee and fried food. But what struck him most was how packed the place was. Every single table seemed to be full of people who had also taken shelter from the storm. There were construction workers still wearing their hard hats, elderly couples sharing a piece of pie, a young mother trying to keep her 2 kids entertained with crayons and paper napkins. Everyone looked comfortable and relaxed, like they belonged here. David felt completely out of place in his expensive suit and Italian leather shoes. He stood by the entrance for a moment, water dripping from his clothes onto the checkered floor. A few people glanced up at him with curiosity. He probably looked like he had been swimming in his clothes. His phone buzzed again, another missed call. The board meeting was supposed to start in 90 minutes, and he was stuck in the middle of nowhere. "I'll be right with you, sir," called out a voice from behind the counter. David looked over and saw a woman in her late 20s wearing a simple uniform and an apron. She was carrying 3 plates of food, moving quickly between tables with a smile on her face. Her name tag said, "Rebecca." David checked his expensive watch and felt his blood pressure rising. He didn't have time to wait around in some roadside diner. He needed to get back to the city immediately. Looking outside, the storm was getting worse, not better. The rain was now coming down so hard that he could barely see the parking lot. He pulled out his phone and tried calling his driver, but the call went straight to voicemail. Then he tried his assistant, his business partner, even his lawyer. Nobody was picking up. The storm must have knocked out some cell towers because his signal kept cutting in and out. Rebecca was still moving around the diner, refilling coffee cups and taking orders. She seemed to know everyone by name. An old man in overalls was telling her about his grandson's baseball game, and she listened like it was the most important thing in the world. David couldn't understand how anyone could waste time on such meaningless conversations when there was real work to be done. "Excuse me," David called out, raising his voice above the chatter in the diner. "I need a table immediately." Rebecca looked over and gave him a polite smile. "Of course, sir. I'll have something ready for you in just a few minutes. We're a bit busy because of the storm, but I promise I'll get you seated as soon as possible." "A few minutes?" David felt his jaw clench. He was used to people dropping everything the moment he walked into a room. Restaurant managers would personally escort him to the best table. Hotel staff would practically run to fulfill his requests. And here was this waitress telling him to wait a few minutes like he was just another customer. "Do you have any idea who I am?" he asked, his voice getting louder. Several people at nearby tables turned to look at him. Rebecca's smile never wavered, but David could see a flicker of confusion in her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir, but we serve everyone in the order they arrive. There's a couple ahead of you who've been waiting for about 10 minutes. But I promise I'll get you seated just as soon as I can." David felt his face getting hot. The couple she was talking about looked like they worked in a factory or something. Their clothes were simple and clean, but definitely not expensive. And they were going to get a table before him? Before someone who owned 3 companies and employed thousands of people? His phone buzzed with a text message from his secretary. The board meeting had been moved up by 30 minutes. Now he had less than an hour to somehow get back to the city. His breathing became shallow and quick. This whole situation was spiraling out of control. The storm outside seemed to be getting even worse. Lightning flashed through the windows, followed by thunder so loud it made the glasses on the tables rattle. David realized he might be stuck here for hours. The thought made his stomach turn. He looked around the diner again, taking in all the regular people just going about their day. They didn't seem bothered by the storm at all. In fact, many of them seemed to be enjoying themselves, laughing and talking like they had all the time in the world. It made no sense to him. Didn't they have important things to do? Didn't they understand that time was money? Rebecca was now taking an order from a table of teenagers who were sharing a single milkshake. She wrote everything down carefully, even though their order was probably only worth about $15. David watched her waste precious minutes asking them if they wanted extra pickles on their burgers and whether they preferred regular or sweet potato fries. Every second that passed made David more agitated. He could feel his heart beating faster, and his hands were starting to shake slightly. This was not how his day was supposed to go. He was supposed to be in control, making important decisions, running his empire. Instead, he was trapped in a tiny diner, surrounded by people who didn't understand the value of efficiency. The smell of coffee was strong in the air, mixed with the sound of plates clinking and people chatting. Under normal circumstances, David might have found it cozy. But right now, it felt like a prison. He needed to get out of here, but the storm wasn't giving him any choice. Rebecca finally finished with the teenagers and started walking toward him with menus in her hand. David felt a small surge of relief. Finally, he was going to get some service. But then she stopped at another table to refill someone's coffee cup, and David felt his patience snap like a rubber band that had been stretched too far. David's hands were shaking now, not from the cold, but from pure anger. He watched Rebecca move around the diner like she had all the time in the world. She was now chatting with an elderly woman about her cat's surgery. Nodding and smiling like this was the most important conversation of her life. Meanwhile, his phone kept buzzing with urgent messages from his company. "This is ridiculous," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for people at nearby tables to hear. A construction worker glanced over at him with raised eyebrows, but David didn't care anymore. He was tired of being polite to people who clearly didn't understand how business worked. Rebecca finally started walking toward him again, carrying a coffee pot in one hand and menus in the other. David felt his shoulders relax slightly. About time. But then, disaster struck as Rebecca passed the table next to David. She turned to ask an older gentleman if he wanted more coffee. The man nodded and Rebecca began pouring. But at that exact moment, someone at another table called out her name loudly, asking for the check. Rebecca turned her head quickly to respond, and her elbow bumped into the coffee pot. Time seemed to slow down as David watched the dark liquid fly through the air. It wasn't a lot of coffee, maybe just a few drops, but those drops landed directly on the sleeve of his Italian suit jacket. The same jacket he had paid more money for than most people made in a month. "Are you kidding me?" David exploded, jumping up from his spot so fast that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. The entire diner went quiet. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Even the teenagers sharing the milkshake turned to stare. Rebecca's face went pale. She immediately set down the coffee pot and grabbed some napkins from her apron. "Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, sir. Let me help you clean that up right away." But David was beyond reason now. All the frustration from his broken car, the missed meetings, the waiting, and now this final insult came pouring out of him like water from a broken dam. "Do you have any idea what you've just done?" he shouted, his voice echoing off the walls of the small diner. "This jacket costs more than you probably make in 3 months. Are you completely incompetent?" Rebecca stood frozen with the napkins in her hand, her eyes wide with shock. The friendly smile she had worn all evening was completely gone now, replaced by a look of hurt and confusion. "Sir, I really am sorry. It was an accident." Please let me help you, she said quietly, trying to reach toward his jacket with the napkins. Don't touch me, David snapped, stepping back like she was carrying some kind of disease. You've done enough damage already. Do you know who I am? Do you have any idea what kind of day I'm having because of people like you? The silence in the diner was deafening now. Even the storm outside seemed quieter than the tension inside. David could feel everyone's eyes on him, but he didn't care. He was too angry to think straight. People like me? Rebecca repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. There was something in her tone that should have warned David to stop, but he was too caught up in his rage to notice. Yes, people like you, David continued, his voice getting louder with each word. People who don't pay attention to what they're doing. People who don't understand the value of hard work or responsibility. People who think the world owes them something when they can't even serve coffee without making a mess. An older woman at a corner table gasped audibly. The construction worker who had been watching earlier stood up slowly, his face hard with anger. But David was just getting started. I've been sitting here for 20 minutes waiting for basic service that I could get at any decent restaurant in 5 minutes. 20 minutes. Do you know how much money I make in 20 minutes? More than you probably see in a year. And now you've ruined a jacket that costs more than your car. Rebecca's hands were trembling now as she held the napkins. David could see tears starting to form in her eyes, but he felt no sympathy. He was too wrapped up in his own anger and frustration. I want to speak to your manager immediately, David demanded. This is completely unacceptable. You're going to pay for this jacket, and then you're going to explain to your boss why you shouldn't be fired for treating customers like this. Sir, please, Rebecca said, her voice cracking slightly. It really was just an accident. I've been working here for 2 years and nothing like this has ever happened before. Please, I'll do whatever I can to make this right. 2 years? David laughed, but there was no humor in it. 2 years of what? Learning how to spill coffee on people? This is exactly what's wrong with this country. People think they deserve good jobs when they can't even handle simple tasks. The young mother with 2 kids quickly covered her children's ears and shot David a look of pure disgust. The teenagers stopped sharing their milkshake and stared at him like he was some kind of monster. But David was too far gone to stop now. I build companies, he continued, pointing at himself. I create jobs for thousands of people. I make decisions that affect entire industries. And I have to sit here and watch you waste my time because you can't handle carrying a coffee pot without destroying other people's property. Rebecca wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing a tear across her cheek. The sight should have made David feel ashamed of himself, but instead it just made him angrier. He hated seeing weakness, especially when he was already having the worst day of his life. You know what? Forget the manager, David said, pulling out his phone. Calling the owner of this place. And then I'm calling my lawyer. You're going to learn that actions have consequences, even if nobody ever taught you that before. The diner was so quiet now that David could hear the coffee maker gurgling behind the counter. Every single person in the place was staring at him, with a mixture of shock, anger, and disgust. Children were hiding behind their parents. Elderly couples were shaking their heads sadly. The construction workers looked like they wanted to throw him out into the storm, but David didn't care about any of them. He was too focused on his own problems, his own anger, his own sense of being wronged by the world. He had no idea that his life was about to change forever, and that the quiet young woman standing in front of him with tears in her eyes was about to teach him a lesson he would never forget. David stood there with his phone in his hand, breathing heavily like he had just run a marathon. His face was red and sweat was mixing with the rainwater still dripping from his hair. He expected Rebecca to start crying harder, maybe run to the back room or call for help. That's what usually happened when he lost his temper with employees. But something strange happened instead. Rebecca slowly straightened up. She wiped the tears from her eyes with a napkin, took a deep breath, and looked directly at David. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm and steady. So calm that it cut through the angry noise in David's head like a knife through butter. Mr. Chun, she said quietly, but loud enough for everyone in the diner to hear. David's mouth fell open. How did she know his name? He hadn't told anyone who he was. His confusion must have shown on his face because Rebecca continued with the same eerily calm voice. David Chun, CEO of TechFlow Industries. You were just on the news last week, weren't you? Testifying before Congress about your company's employment practices. The phone slipped from David's hand and clattered onto the floor. The sound echoed through the silent diner like a gunshot. Everyone was staring now, but not just at him. They were looking back and forth between him and Rebecca like they were watching a tennis match. I remember watching that hearing, Rebecca continued, her voice getting stronger with each word. You sat there in your expensive suit just like the one you're wearing now, and you told all those senators how much you cared about American workers. How your company was built on the idea of giving people opportunities to build better lives for their families. David's heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. How was this happening? How did some waitress in a roadside diner know about his congressional testimony? And why was she talking to him like she knew him personally? You want to know something interesting, Mr. Chun? Rebecca asked, but she didn't wait for an answer. I used to work for you. The words hit David like a physical blow. He actually took a step backward, bumping into his chair. The construction. Workers at the nearby table leaned forward, suddenly very interested in what Rebecca had to say. 3 years ago, I was a software engineer at Datalink Solutions. You remember Datalink, don't you? The company you bought and then shut down 6 months later to eliminate competition. You called it streamlining operations for maximum efficiency. David's mind was racing. Datalink, yes. He remembered that acquisition. It had been a smart business move. They had bought the company for its customer list and patents, then absorbed the valuable employees into TechFlow and let the rest go. Standard business practice. Nothing personal. I had been working there for 4 years, Rebecca continued, and David noticed that other people in the diner were putting down their forks and coffee cups to listen. I loved my job. I was good at it too. I had just gotten a promotion and a raise. My manager said I was one of the most promising developers on the team. She paused and looked around the diner at all the faces watching her. The elderly woman who had been talking about her cat was dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. The teenagers had forgotten all about their milkshake. But then your company bought us out, Rebecca said, turning back to David. And you know what happened. Next, you kept about 20% of the employees. The ones with the most experience and the highest salaries. The rest of us got a 2-week notice and a thank you card. David wanted to say something, to defend himself, to explain that business was business and that these decisions weren't personal. But somehow no words would come out of his mouth. He felt like his throat had closed up completely. I remember the day I got laid off, Rebecca said, her voice getting softer but somehow more powerful at the same time. I was planning to propose to my boyfriend that weekend. I had been saving up for a ring for months. I had already picked out the restaurant and everything. The young mother with the 2 children was shaking her head sadly. One of the construction workers muttered something under his breath that sounded like a curse word. But instead of proposing, I had to call him and tell him I lost my job. We had to cancel our vacation plans, postpone the engagement, everything. He was very understanding about it, but I could see how disappointed he was. We had talked about starting a family, buying a house, building a life together. Rebecca's voice cracked slightly on the last few words, but she kept going. David felt like he was frozen in place, unable to move or speak or even think clearly. The worst part wasn't losing the job, though, Rebecca said. The worst part was losing my health insurance? See, my mom had just been diagnosed with diabetes. She needed medication and regular doctor visits, expensive stuff. But with my job, we had great insurance that covered everything. David could feel his chest getting tight. This wasn't how this conversation was supposed to go. He was the one who was supposed to be angry. He was the victim here. His jacket was ruined. His day was destroyed. His meetings were missed. After I lost my insurance, my mom couldn't afford her medicine anymore, Rebecca continued. She tried to ration it, taking half doses to make it last longer. She didn't tell me because she didn't want me to worry. But I found out when she collapsed at the grocery store and had to go to the emergency room. The diner was so quiet now that David could hear his own breathing. It sounded loud and harsh in the silence. Several people were crying openly now, and even the tough-looking construction workers had tears in their eyes. That's when I took this job, Rebecca said, gesturing around the diner. 2 jobs, actually. I work here during the day and clean. Offices at night, 60 hours a week, sometimes more. It's honest work, and I'm grateful for it. But it pays about 1/3 of what I used to make as an engineer. David felt like the ground was shifting underneath his feet. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of nightmare. He was the successful one here. He was the one who built companies and created jobs and made important decisions. How was he suddenly the bad guy in this story? But you know what, Mr. Chun? Rebecca said, and now there was something different in her voice. Not anger exactly, but something stronger. Something that made David's knees feel weak. I don't regret taking this job, because working here taught me something that I never learned in all my years as an engineer. It taught me about dignity. She looked around the diner again, at all the regular people who had been having a normal evening until David came in and started shouting, "These people here? They treat me with respect. They say please and thank you. They ask about my family and remember my name. They understand that everyone is just trying to get by, trying to take care of the people they love." Rebecca turned back to David, and her eyes were dry now. Clear and strong and completely unafraid. That's something you never learned, is it? David's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. Rebecca's question hung in the air between them like a challenge he couldn't answer. The truth was, he had never learned about dignity. Not the kind she was talking about. Rebecca wasn't finished, though. She stood there in her simple uniform, looking more powerful than David had ever felt in his most expensive suits. When she spoke again, her voice carried across the entire diner with a strength that made everyone lean forward to listen. You see, Mr. Chun, I've been watching you on television for 3 years now. Every time there's a business conference or a news interview, there you are, talking about success and achievement. You love to tell people that you started with nothing and built an empire through hard work. David felt his legs getting weak. He wanted to sit down, but somehow he couldn't move. It was like Rebecca's words had turned him into a statue. But here's what you don't talk about, Rebecca continued. You don't mention the hundreds of families you destroyed along the way. You don't talk about the people who lost their homes because you decided their jobs weren't profitable enough. You don't mention the workers who had to choose between buying medicine and paying rent because you cut their benefits. An older man in the corner booth started clapping slowly. Then another person joined in. Soon, half the diner was applauding Rebecca, and the sound filled the small space like thunder. David felt his face burning with embarrassment. I used to be angry about what happened to me, Rebecca said when the clapping died down. I used to lie awake at night thinking about how unfair it all was. How someone like you could make decisions. That ruined my life without even knowing my name. She picked up a coffee cup from the table next to her and held it gently in both hands like it was something precious. But then I started working here, and I learned something important. Real success isn't about how much money you have or how many companies you own. Real success is about how you treat people when you don't have to, when nobody's watching, when there's nothing in it for you. David looked around the diner and saw all the faces staring at him, but they weren't looking at him with the fear or respect he was used to. They were looking at him like he was something small and disappointing, like he was the one who needed to be pitied. Every day I serve people who work hard for their money, Rebecca continued. Construction workers who get up at 5 in the morning, nurses who work double shifts to take care of sick people, single mothers who juggle 3 jobs just to keep their kids fed and clothed. She gestured toward the construction workers at the nearby table, who nodded respectfully back at her. These people understand something you've forgotten, Mr. Chun. They understand that we're all in this together. That everyone deserves to be treated with kindness and respect, no matter what they do for a living or how much money they have. David tried to speak, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. I didn't know, You didn't know? Rebecca's eyebrows went up in surprise. You didn't know that your decisions affected real people? You didn't know that when you eliminate jobs to save money, those jobs belong to human beings with families and dreams and medical bills? The teenage girl sharing the milkshake with her friends started recording with her phone. David noticed other people pulling out their phones too. His heart started racing for a different reason now. This was going to be all over social media within hours. Or maybe, Rebecca said, her voice getting softer but somehow more cutting, you did know, but you just didn't care. Because caring would have made your job harder. Caring would have meant making less profit. Caring would have meant thinking about people like me as more than just numbers on a spreadsheet. David felt like he was shrinking, getting smaller and smaller under the weight of her words. He had never thought about it that way before. To him, business decisions were just that: business, numbers and profits and efficiency. He had never put faces on those numbers. I want to tell you something else, Mr. Chun, Rebecca said, and now her voice was gentle, almost kind. After I lost my job, after my mom got sick, after everything fell apart, I applied to work at your new company, TechFlow Industries. 3 different times. David's eyes widened. He had no memory of her applications, of course. He probably got thousands of applications every month. Each time I got an automatic rejection email. It said that TechFlow Industries was looking for candidates with uninterrupted career progression and demonstrated commitment to excellence. In other words, people who had never been laid off. People who had never had their careers destroyed. By companies like yours? The irony hit David like a physical blow. She couldn't get hired by his company because his other company had fired her. It was like a terrible joke, except nobody was laughing. So here I am, Rebecca said, spreading her arms wide to indicate the diner around them, serving coffee and taking orders and cleaning tables. And you know what? I'm good at it. Just like I was good at being an engineer, because I learned something that you apparently never did. She leaned forward slightly, and David found himself leaning in too, like he was being drawn in by some invisible force. I learned that every job matters. Every person matters. The way you treat people when they're serving your food or cleaning your office or answering your phones, that says everything about who you really are as a person. David looked down at his expensive shoes, at the coffee stains on his jacket, at his phone lying broken on the floor. Suddenly, none of it seemed important anymore. His missed meetings, his ruined suit, his expensive car sitting dead in the parking lot, it all felt so small compared to what Rebecca was telling him. You want to know the really sad part, Mr. Chun? Rebecca asked, and David looked up to meet her eyes. I used to admire you. When I was studying computer science in college, I read articles about your success story. I thought you were someone to look up to. Someone who proved that hard work and determination could overcome anything. She shook her head sadly, and David felt something break inside his chest. But now I know the truth. You didn't overcome anything. You just climbed over other people to get where you wanted to go, and you convinced yourself that was the same thing. The storm outside was still raging, but inside the diner, you could have heard a pin drop. David felt like he was seeing himself. Clearly for the first time in years, and he didn't like what he saw. Not at all. David stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only a few seconds. The weight of Rebecca's words settled on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. He could feel everyone in the diner watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. For the first time in his adult life, he had absolutely no idea what to say. Slowly, like an old man with arthritis, David bent down and picked up his broken phone from the floor. The screen was cracked, and it wouldn't turn on. Somehow that seemed fitting. Everything in his perfectly controlled world was falling apart, starting with his assumptions about himself. Double quotes. David started to speak, then stopped. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, smaller and less confident than usual. He cleared his throat and tried again. I never thought about it that way. Rebecca tilted her head slightly, studying his face like she was trying to figure out if he was being sincere. The construction workers were still watching him with suspicious eyes. The elderly couple in the corner looked like they were ready to call him out if he said anything else cruel or stupid. You never thought about it because you never had to? Rebecca said quietly. When you make decisions from the top floor of a corporate building, it's easy to forget that those decisions affect real people living real lives. David nodded slowly. It was true, and he knew it. He spent his days looking at charts and graphs and profit margins. He talked about human resources and workforce optimization like people were just another kind of equipment that could be bought, used, and discarded when no longer needed. Rebecca, he said, and using her name felt strange and important somehow. I owe you an apology, not just for tonight, but for everything. For what happened to your job, your mother, your life plans. I'm sorry. The teenager with the phone looked surprised, like she hadn't expected this turn in the story. Several people in the diner shifted in their seats, unsure what to make of this sudden change in David's attitude. Rebecca studied his face for a long moment before responding. Apologies are nice, Mr. Chun, but they don't pay medical bills. They don't give people back the years they lost struggling to survive because of decisions you made in boardrooms. David felt his throat getting tight. She was right, of course. Saying sorry was easy. Anyone could say sorry. But what could he actually do to make things right? What can I do? He asked, and the question came out sounding desperate. How can I fix this? How can I fix any of this? Rebecca looked around the diner at all the faces watching their conversation. The young mother had moved her children to a table farther away, but she was still listening. The construction workers had stopped, pretending to eat, and were openly staring. Even the cook had come out from behind the counter to watch. You really want to know? Rebecca asked. You want to know how you can fix this? David nodded eagerly, like a student hoping to get the right answer on a test. Start seeing people, Rebecca said simply. Not employees or human resources or workforce. Statistics, people with names and families and dreams and problems. She gestured toward the construction worker who had been watching the whole scene unfold. That's Mike. He's been coming here for lunch every day for 2 years. He's saving money to buy his daughter a car for her 16th birthday. She wants to be a veterinarian someday. Then she pointed to the elderly woman who had been crying earlier. That's Mrs. Rodriguez. Her husband died last year, and she comes here every Tuesday because it's the only place she feels comfortable eating alone. The staff here treats her like family. David looked around the diner with new eyes. Suddenly, these weren't just random people taking up space and making noise. They were individuals with their own stories, their own struggles, their own hopes. What about your mother? David asked quietly. How is she doing now? Rebecca's expression softened slightly. She's managing. The medication is expensive, but we make it work. I've learned to cook diabetic-friendly meals, and she's gotten better about checking her blood sugar regularly. It's not easy, but we're okay. David pulled out his wallet and started counting bills. He had about $300 in cash, which was more than he usually carried. He held it out to Rebecca. Double quotes, please, take this for your mother's medicine. Rebecca shook her head firmly. I don't want your money, Mr. Chun. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? David asked, genuinely confused. What do you want from me? Rebecca smiled for the first time since the coffee incident. It was a sad smile, but it was real. I want you to remember this conversation, she said. I want you to remember that the next time you're sitting in a boardroom making decisions about people's lives, those people have names and faces and families. They're not just numbers on a spreadsheet. David nodded, feeling tears starting to form in his eyes. When was the last time he had cried? He couldn't even remember. And I want you to remember that how you treat people when you're angry or frustrated or having a bad day, that's who you really are. Not the polite person you are in business meetings or TV interviews. The person you are when you think nobody important is watching. The storm outside was finally starting to calm down. The thunder was getting quieter, and the rain wasn't hitting the windows as hard. David noticed that several people in the diner were now openly recording their conversation with their phones. Tomorrow, this would probably be all over the internet. "Your driver is here," Rebecca said, looking out the window. David turned and saw his company car pulling into the parking lot. His assistant must have finally gotten his messages and sent. "Help, my jacket," David said suddenly, looking down at the coffee stains on his sleeve. "You don't need to pay for this." "It was an accident," Rebecca nodded. "Thank you. But Mr. Chun?" "Yes?" That jacket will get cleaned, and in a few days you'll forget all about the stains. But I hope you don't forget about tonight. I hope you don't forget about the people whose lives you touch with your decisions." David looked around the diner one more time. Mike, the construction worker, gave him a small nod. Mrs. Rodriguez was watching him with curiosity rather than anger. Now, the teenagers had put away their phones and were finishing their milkshake. The young mother was helping her children put on their coats. "I won't forget," David said, and he meant it. "Rebecca, I thank you for everything you said tonight. You've given me a lot to think about." As David walked toward the door, he heard quiet conversations starting up again behind him. The normal sounds of the diner returning. But he knew that nothing would ever be normal for him again. Rebecca had shown him a mirror and he didn't like what he had seen. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to become someone better. The last thing he heard as he opened the door was Rebecca's voice calling out to another customer, "More coffee. Mrs. Patterson, how's your grandson doing in college?" And David realized that this was what dignity looked like. This was what success really meant. Taking care of people, remembering their names, treating everyone like they mattered. He had a lot of work to do,